All right, man.
Live.
We are a go. Did it.
3K, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, man. I got my lucky Hello Kitty Dad headphones. I've got this delicious cocktail of bourbon and water. Hold the bourbon.
Nice.
So everything is ready for a good draft eve hangout. How about yourself?
I'm pretty well prepared, I've got a busy day trying to get shit ready here, but we're tracking well and gonna be a big week at big week at TST and SB Nation. So
What's going on this week? Is there something related to the NFL?
I can't remember what it is. I forgot. Super Bowl or something like that. I'm a Rams fan. I didn't know the playoffs exist. I forgot.
Then, if you're a Rams fan, then the draft is your Super Bowl. Come on.
It really has been our Super Bowl 3K. It's sort of been it's been a big part of the TST community for a long time now. We've got a good smart community of fans around especially when it comes to the draft on the site. We've been very fortunate to have that. So we should jump in here and maybe talk some draft, I guess.
Let's.
Or, like soap opera reviews or something like that.
Yeah, and so obviously this is changing hour to hour. It's
Hour.
3:12 because we're so prompt with these Google Hangouts. We got to work on that.
Because they're so fucking easy to do.
I'm ready for 2018 where it's just one button, do what I want. Just do what I want. It's 3:12, 3:13 now here on the East Coast. You're here in D.C. We're going to be working it behind the scenes at SBN headquarters. What is the state of the draft right now? Right now, is there anything that we actually know? Is there anything that we actually believe, or is it just a mess of
I think we know
leaks and all that?
We know less now than we did 24 hours ago, 24 hours before that, and then any number of days before that. Because like right now, it's just a snowstorm of bogus rumors and stupid, smoke screens and.
Yep.
I really don't know. I kind of tuned it out a lot today because it's just sort of. None of it really. It's like, are the Jaguars going to really leak their pick at third overall 30 hours before the draft, like
Sure.
Manziel stuff today, or the Browns rumors or the Raiders rumors. They just all just sort of like, but it's always interesting too because there's always a little bit of, there's always some sort of kernel of truth in the middle of all that too. And you pay attention to it, and you do kind of, because when you go back, and this is something we're going to do, we're going to go back and see, like, okay, who had it right, who was it, what was the smoke screen, what was real, what wasn't real, so that sort of thing. But it's, so, there's nuggets of information out there, but if you could filter the what's real and what's not real out of that, that's sort of the key, but I think I think it's impossible to do at this point unless you are the team's GM or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that's part of what makes the draft fun. And one thing I was thinking about this morning that I thought was important just to note is how, and part of it is by design by the NFL, but how ridiculously entertaining this is as a product, right? And you've gotten to this point now in the 2014 draft. 29 hours out, and nobody has any clue of what's going to possibly happen, right? So even from the beginning, you've got uncertainty, which creates for what could be an incredibly entertaining, dramatic product. And so I think, one of the pieces I wanted to go back and talk about, if you want to pull it up, is the mock draft you dropped at the mothership 2 days ago.
I hadn't gotten mock draft. I hadn't done a mock draft in a while. I hadn't gotten mock draft. I missed the hate mail. I missed the comments. So,
I haven't done a mock draft since last May. I did one right after the draft, and I just kind of let the internet sift through it. But that's the thing is in 2014 you don't need to, and we've got a mock draft for almost every possibility. You throw in all the trades and, mock trades, but almost the potential for, so many trades in the first round. What do you feel going back to that top three, let's say? You had Houston with Jadeveon Clowney, St. Louis taking Jake Matthews, who's getting more popular as we go on, and then the Atlanta Falcons move. A lot of people are expecting Atlanta to move up into that top five. You've got them going third to Jacksonville to take Khalil Mack. Any of those three that you feel more comfortable about or less confident in now 2 days later?
I think Clowney will be the first player picked. I really do. Now, the question is Houston going to pick him, or is somebody else going to pick him, or like a trade and pick type scenario? But I still think that I still think the place to be is Houston. Yeah, for Clowney, I mean, it just makes sense to me. He's the best player in the draft. It's simple, really. Now, what can you get in return? I guess that's sort of the key that the Texans have to answer, and that really kind of changes the tone of the draft then too, because a week ago, this is more of that weird and bogus information that I'm trying to figure out what's real and what's not real out there. But a week ago, trades weren't expected to be cost teams very much that were looking to move up. Well, today it's to move up to number one, you're looking at. They literally said, you need something like the RG3 deal the Rams got in 2012. It's like, well, I don't know. So, what's the price going to be? I mean, to me, I look at Atlanta. They seem hell-bent to trade up for either him or Mack, and I wouldn't rule out Khalil Mack for Atlanta either. I think he'd be a good fit there too, if they don't get Clowney or they don't want to pay the price to move up to get Clowney. So, and that's why I mocked him at number 3 to the Jaguars there, because I think that's I think that's who it was. But I think that's a trade with the Jaguars. But I think that's a good, sound thing to do, and I don't know that, it'd be as costly for them to move up to take Mack at number 3 versus, to number 1 to take Clowney. I mean, and those are the 2 best pass rushers in this draft, hands down.
Right.
And it's not a great year for pass rushers beyond those 2 guys. Everybody's sort of a flawed prospect beyond that. It's not like, we've seen for a couple years now. We've had these drafts that were just stocked with, top-tier linemen.
Yep.
But, so, that's an interesting option. And I think that is maybe more why the trade, and that's why the trade could also be expensive, too. You could argue that because, Clowney is that, he's not the kind of guy that comes out very often. He's a fairly rare talent. I mean, I think you have to go back to Ndamukong Suh to think of another defensive player, who was that talented coming into the NFL, who had that same that atypical ability and level of play as a college kid coming to the NFL.
Yeah, and I think the key, as you mentioned, is the drop-off at the position. And if you're looking for an impact pass rusher, Khalil Mack's not going to fit some systems. The systems that he does, obviously, he projects really highly at. But Jadeveon Clowney is one of those guys that you should be able to plug him in, and he should be able to produce week 1. Let me ask you this. What do you think is the best-case scenario for the Rams if they want to move down? Is it Clowney?
Best-case scenario.
Clowney, it leaves all the quarterbacks.
Yes.
If it's maybe a quarterback, then you leave Clowney on the board. What do you think?
Hang on a sec. Obviously the best case scenario for the Rams is for trading out of the number 2 spot is if Houston does something else, and whatever that scenario may be, maybe. And I think we've seen a few suggestions. I think Peter King was maybe one, and then some others that Atlanta may trade up to number 1 for Khalil Mack, or Houston could take Khalil Mack, or something. But in any situation, any case where Clowney doesn't get picked first overall and is still on the board at number 2, I think that's the ideal situation for the Rams. I don't know that that's going to happen because it just seems so far-fetched to me that Clowney wouldn't be the first player picked in the draft. Right. I mean, it just why would you? The quarterbacks, I'm probably a little higher on the quarterbacks this year than I think other people are. We've got set this sort of unrealistic standard that every quarterback in the first round needs to be Andrew Luck, in the first year, and that's just not, a very realistic way of looking at that.
I think I brought it up. I don't remember when I had brought that up on Twitter. It was around lunch one of those days, I think last week. And I asked, and I got a couple decent responses of how many quarterbacks in the NFL would most people categorize as being good or better, however you categorize it. And for the most part, people said about half the league, about 15, 16, 12, 14, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So if you go back to Peyton Manning, who's the longest tenured good quarterback, then you're averaging about 1 good quarterback per year. Now, that doesn't mean that every draft class has 1. It just means on average you get 1 good quarterback, and the rest are fill-in guys who hold over until the next quarterback gets to fill the franchise spot, or somebody who just completely busts. One good quarterback per year. So for all these quarterbacks that are lined up for the first round, for the middle rounds, guys like Mettenberger, Aaron Murray, A.J. McCarron, David Fales, if one of those actually pans out, then it suggests on average that none of the other guys, Bortles, Manziel, and Bridgewater primarily, are going to pan out, just on average.
Right.
And I think, and I get it, it's a recency bias. That 2014 draft is in front of us. We look at it and we say, okay, I could see this guy fitting over here. I could see this guy making it over here. And you look at all these prospects, and things look obviously more positive now than they will in hindsight. But I wanted to get that position out there from you on what you thought was best, because that kind of gives us as Rams fans something to be rooting for going into that first pick tomorrow night.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you kind of go down the list, and what's some of the more interesting rumors from a Rams perspective today aren't so much their trade prospects or even the Johnny Manziel stuff, but it's I think you look at the buzz that's kind of out there, and again, it's hard to know what's real and what isn't real, but
Sure.
Are the Lions a possibility to trade up to get Sammy Watkins? Because there's a team that could potentially go up to number 2. Are the Bills interested in either Watkins or Mack or Clown? One of those. Are they? There's talk about the Bills moving up today. Is somebody, our team's interested enough to move up for Greg Robinson? We've heard a little bit about that out there today too. Now, that's all that late H-hour misinformation, and you can't really put a lot of stock in it. But you look at receivers, and you look at the depth and the talent this year, and you look at what a guy like Watkins or even Mike Evans could do, and maybe if you're a team that really thinks you're one player away, this is it's just like that. It's just like the Falcons and Julio Jones. I mean,
Sure.
it's sort of that. Now it's not the perfect example because this is a much better year for receivers.
Right.
There are more first-round guys instead of that year where it was it was just A.J. Green and Julio Jones were the only guys that were really worth a first-round pick among the receivers. But so that's an interesting possibility for the Rams to trade out of number 2, I think, too, because I just don't know that the offensive tackles. I don't buy into the Robinson thing as much. He's good. I don't, that's not the issue. I just don't know that with as many guys as there are at the top of that position right now, it might be more of, teams can move around, but they can move around in a way where they just move up, a pick or two and don't have to really give up a lot to get one of those. Which, and to say that though, now with Greg Robinson, that could be, goes with what's been out there today a little bit too. With is Cleveland really are the Browns? Do they want to take Greg Robinson first and then maybe try to find a quarterback or another guy at number 26? Because that could be a good move for the Browns if they want Greg Robinson to move up to number 2 with the Rams, because they're only jumping up a couple spots. They don't have to give up an RG3 like Hall for that, and the Rams can still get some more picks in this draft, or maybe it's one next year. I mean, I think this is a good draft to have more picks. It's not like so many previous drafts where it's just the picks are garbage wherever you get them.
Yeah.
So it's this is there's a lot of different scenarios out there, and again, this is just sort of maybe we're lost in the deluge of information that's out.
Sure.
You can really even legitimately call it information, but
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up offensive tackle, because as we get through to the end of this mock, I want to reference some of the stuff later on, the day 2 and day 3 picks, which are a lot of times more important to some franchises than the day 1 picks. And I think when you bring up offensive tackle, I think that's a position that could end up being the most drafted position on day 2 in the second round, specifically because there's a lot of guys going down there.
Yeah, and that's probably a good point. And then I kind of danced around. You asked about the top 3 picks, and I danced around the number 2
Sure.
with Jake Matthews a little bit. I don't, I think that's me making a safe pick for a team that's probably gonna, I assume is probably leans more toward making safe picks. When it comes
that history suggests that.
Yeah, or in the sense that I just don't, I don't really know, and we can talk about this at some point too, but I don't really know how much stock to put in the Manziel talk. As exciting as it is,
Sure.
and as much as that's what I would do, that's what I would prefer the Rams to do. I don't, I really can't put a lot of, not for the sanity of mock draft, not for the sake of the sacred mock draft, but just for my own sanity. I can't really. It's hard.
I was going to say, you don't want to get your heart broken.
Exactly.
I can hear it. But yeah, one of the things I wanted to mention, and you kind of got there with Mike Evans, was to this point, a lot of my, and especially now today, one day prior to the draft, you've got kind of a consensus top six that seems to have worked its way around most mock drafts, however it ends out, and that's Jadeveon Clowney, Khalil Mack, Sammy Watkins, Jake Matthews, and Johnny Manziel, along with Greg Robinson. Beyond that, and I think this is where it gets real interesting for the Rams, sitting at 13, because they've got another half dozen picks in front of them. There's almost no consistency, and I think it's going to lean on what happens early, because every year we see, one of those picks from, let's say, pick 4 to pick 10, especially when the Raiders are involved.
Yeah.
Throwing off the draft, and everything just spirals from there, and, one guy will jump a couple more spots, then you get a trade, and, then you get a pick that most people had some consensus on because the conventional wisdom coalesced around, and then you get another crazy pick, and things. Now the guy that you expected to go 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th is there at 13, kind of like a Robert Quinn a couple years ago. Is there anybody that you feel, maybe a team, maybe a prospect, that you think is going to be that hinge that throws off the draft, that throws off most mocks?
The buzz now is Aaron Donald, the top 10. Aaron Donald is a top 10 pick, and maybe that's the case. I could see that he's a good player. I mean, you go back and read Stephen White's breakdown of him that we had on SB Nation, and it's just he's a good defensive tackle, and he has a lot of room to improve. And it's not like, again, this goes back to it's not a great year for defensive tackles either.
Right.
The second best guy Lewis Nix is sort of obviously a 3. He's more of probably a nose tackle, so he has a certain, kind of a specific appeal. But then it's, the second best defensive tackle might be easily out of Florida, and he's coming off, a torn ACL. So, there's a name to watch that could, but he's a guy that could really throw it off too. Donald in the top 10 is going to throw off a lot of that stuff. Now, maybe that's not as big of a surprise because it's been talked about so much the last couple days, but easily is a guy like that. I think, you heard a little bit about this today with Odell Beckham get picked above Mike Evans, because that's obviously, that's sort of a kink in the prediction machine that, as it's been viewed so far. So, there's always guys like that. It's that, the Tyson Alualu pick. It's that.
It happens every year.
Yeah, it does, and that's a good. That's a good way. Who are you? Who do you think could be like? Which
I don't know. I think Zach Martin's gotten some hype. Close to the draft. He's one guy that's gotten hype. Somebody that I think is not maybe getting the hype that I would expect him to have gotten at this point, and part of it is because there is a drop-off, like we were talking about, into the second round, is Taylor Lewan. If you want a classic, you mentioned the Greg Robinson, right? And maybe they're not being an immediate fit, the jump as a redshirt sophomore and the kind of system that they were running at Auburn. If you want somebody that kind of meets the old school offensive tackle paradigm, and let's be honest, NFL coaches are real comfortable drafting the archetype year after year after year before, making a leap. Taylor Lewan is somebody I would think that would be really enticing to some of these teams. Because he's a guy can get in, and he's got the makeup. He's got the mentality that you kind of want out of that franchise offensive tackle.
Yeah, and he has the and he has the off-field stuff that, for a lot of people on the outside pushes him down. Like, well, he may be a top 10 pick, but, with some pretty awful stuff he was maybe involved with Michigan with sexual assault and assault. And that is maybe, that's something that we look at and is like, oh, he's probably going to slide down in the draft. This is a guy that's probably, as a top 15 player, but it's going to go in the 20s because of, the stuff off the field. But, maybe it's all it takes is one team to kind of look past that and scoop it right, scoop it up. It doesn't matter to that team, or they've investigated a little. It's like sort of the Rams and Janoris Jenkins, although he obviously did.
I was about to say.
But, the team that does their homework on this stuff is going to be, is going to go into the draft thinking they're fine with it and not try to get too cute and move around with it.
And I think that's one of those keys. You mentioned the Rams and kind of the red flag for the off-field behavior stuff. Now having brought in Kenny Britt, I think it's pretty obvious that Jeff Fisher is not uncomfortable with managing those kinds of personalities, that kind of, the off-field red flags. Now, some coaches, I don't remember who that last coach was for the Rams, seem to have trouble managing personalities, right, and integrating them into a cohesive team. Fisher's not afraid of that, and it seems that he's done a pretty decent job of it throughout his career.
That's
One
right,
thing I think that's
and
been
that makes
difficult.
the Manziel talk even. I think that's another angle that's probably
Sure.
not talked about enough with the Manziel thing. Is Fisher does it's not just those guys that have had off-field troubles, but he's also a pretty good coach when it comes to sort of managing those big personalities like that. Now, the Vince Young experience, everybody kind of points to the Vince Young experience as a real negative and it wasn't handled, but that's not. I mean that's really more of the exception that kind of proves the rule to me because Vince Young is that was just sort of a unique situation and it just
Sure.
blew up a little bit. Fisher
And
has that expectation on his players that they'll give back and be part of the team as well, and then he can manage their egos within that context. But Vince Young, that wasn't really that didn't happen.
Well, plus you had an owner involved
Yes.
in the whole Vince Young thing, and anytime, no offense to the Cowboys or Raiders fans, anytime you get owners involved into situations that don't usually involve owners, it seems like that makes things more difficult to be successful with, and I think the Vince Young saga may have been another example of that. You get down past maybe that first dozen players, and every mock draft's going to be at least somewhat different. You've got a mix of the safeties, the Calvin Pryors, Quentin Dix. You've got some cornerbacks, Justin Gilbert, Darqueze Dennard, some of the black sheep, the surprise picks, and then some of these quarterbacks start to pop up. How many quarterbacks do you think end up going in this first round? If Manziel is at this point kind of the consensus top guy, you've got maybe Derek Carr, Blake Bortles, Teddy Bridgewater, maybe a wild card, maybe a Tom Savage if you're really buying into that. Do you think there will be 3, 4, 5 quarterbacks in this first round?
I mean, you go down the list. I think Manziel's a first-round pick. The Bortles thing's weird. That's changed a little bit in the last few days. Excuse me, with some talk, if he will maybe slip to the second round. I don't believe it. I don't buy it. I think he's still a first-round pick. I still kind of think Teddy Bridgewater is a first-round pick, although the all-out media assault on him is sort of I do have a little more insight to that, and maybe it's something I could share after the draft. But there might be a little bit of it. It might be unrelated to anything Teddy Bridgewater himself has done.
Gotta assume so.
And it's more, but yeah. So
representative.
I think those three are good to go. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised Derek Carr because he just fits that sort of talk about your archetype.
Sure.
Here's a pocket guy with a big arm, or a big-ish arm, and NFL teams, and this is what's an interesting point about the league, and you see this with the quarterback thing is that there's still so much division on what the quarterback position is and what it does and what it should be, which is why the Tom Savage stuff. It's like if Tom Savage was so freaking good, I mean, come on, or Logan Thomas too.
Sure.
Somebody tweeted that out the other day. Like Logan Thomas could be a first-round pick. No. Have you watched Logan Thomas play football? He's not a first-round pick. I mean,
it's like I said. Somebody's gonna draft Logan Thomas and take a flyer. He'll probably end up getting a shot, and I guarantee he'll throw some of the most beautiful interceptions you've ever seen. He will change. He will change the way we describe interceptions. People
and it makes more sense.
Will weep at the beauty of that interception. Just perfect.
And it makes some sense. We might be a little surprised though with the quarterbacks because, if you draft them in the first round, you can get the fifth-year option that you can't get on a player taken after the first round, and that gives teams an extra year at new rookie contract prices.
Right.
So, if you're taking a guy and you're envisioning him, if this is a guy that you feel like can be a franchise quarterback, I mean, and you feel confident enough to draft him and develop him, even if you do have a starter, even if you don't, or even if you need to start from day one of the season, but
sure,
there's that value when it comes, especially when it comes to quarterbacks, because that saves you another year, that saves a team a year of, that's an extra year of cheap contract for a player that you obviously envision as somebody that can be your starting quarterback, and that's that's different than a tight end or a or a defensive tackle or an offensive tackle. You know what I mean? It's just
Yeah, of course.
it's absolutely it's got to be a factor, and so that's why I think maybe then you could see like Carr. Here's a guy. I think if Aaron Murray hadn't been injured, I'd kind of wonder if he would maybe slip into the back of the first round. I don't think he probably does now. Although I'd say he's an intriguing guy to watch. I have gone back and watched a little bit more of Murray's film since all this quarterback stuff has come up with the Rams, and it's he's not bad. He's not a bad.
No, he's not at all.
And really sort of you talk to college football fans, and he's really underrated, and they can understand why NFL people are dumping on him. And I think part of it is because he got tagged with the Andy Dalton comparison early on.
Sure.
And that's not what that's a bad narrative that gets attached to your frame and as we all know in the NFL, sometimes the narrative wins whether it's true or not. So
yeah.
McCarron, I mean, is there a guy? I think it'd be nuts for somebody to take A.J. McCarron in the first round, but there's some nutty teams out there, and that could totally happen. So that's kind of an interesting little plot to watch too as this goes on. I mean, maybe it's the Rams. I mean, the Rams, look at what they did with Ogletree last year. You traded around and you traded down, and to get kind of the player where you wanted to get him in the first round. And sure enough, I mean, maybe that's what this quarterback thing that's sort of lost in the Johnny Manziel discussion is that maybe that's what the Rams have in mind too. I mean, I think that 13th pick is just as tradable of a commodity as the second overall pick.
Yeah, I'd have to say so. And I think you mentioned part of what makes it interesting. In years past, under the old CBA, that march towards the end of the first round was a little bit tough because you didn't get a reset of the order and you had all the playoff teams, and you knew that a lot of them were cushioned into taking BPA and had a built-in advantage where all these desperate teams, really had to hit the mark early on. Now under the new model, as you mentioned, with the fifth-year option, you've got teams like Denver, like New Orleans, maybe New England, if they're not really that high on Ryan Mallett anymore, that have got some aging veteran quarterbacks that at some point are going to have to start really testing out who's going to be the first look at replacing some of these guys, Hall of Famers and Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, and Tom Brady. At some point they're going to want to get somebody in-house. And if you can do that now through your late first-round pick, like you mentioned, all those options at quarterback, you don't have to play Aaron Murray year one, when you've got Peyton Manning. Is Peyton Manning going to be around 2017? That's really hard to see. And at that point, you would have a cheap Aaron Murray that isn't that cost prohibitive, who's got years of tutelage under the system, years of working with somebody like Peyton Manning.
That's right.
And you would think, depending on the draft, they may be maybe more attractive than any other option in the draft 3 years from now. I think that's going to make the end of the first round really exciting. The other thing that I think, there are two positions that I think could get really could fly off the board at the end of the first that are going to have big ramifications. Man, I'm going so hard on the puns on our next hangout. I'm not storing them up. I don't want to use them all yet. And it's really three positions, but it's the group. It's wide receiver and interior offensive line. I'm going to be interested to see when that interior offensive line level gets cracked this year, because last year with Chance Warmack and Jonathan Cooper, you had two guys who were potential top 10, and obviously Cooper broke that in the single digits. This year it doesn't seem like anybody's, as long as you consider Zach Martin, let's say a hybrid and not a pure interior guy, with Xavier Su'a-Filo, Joel Bitonio, you got some different prospects there that maybe could crack the first round, but not any time early, not in the first half, you would think. Maybe there's some other guys, kind of like a Travis Frederick, that a team, maybe not as crazy as the Cowboys, but in a more comfortable position says, we really need to fill this spot. We think this is one of the best guys on the board, and they go a little bit deeper to grab a guard or a center. On the other hand, you've got the wide receiver class where you mentioned early on, everybody knows Sammy Watkins is pretty much the consensus best. Maybe we get a surprise pick in Mike Evans. Odell Beckham's got some rising stock. Outside of those guys, then you dip into this big pool of guys like Marquise Lee, Allen Robinson, Kelvin Benjamin, Cody Latimer, who got a lot of hype kind of following the combine out of him, Jordan Matthews. You got a glut of, wide receiver prospects that could go anywhere from late first to early third. And I think it's going to be interesting to see with the day of separation in between rounds 1 and 2, how teams approach that capability to dip into the interior offensive line prospect pool and wide receivers before the first round ends.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's that's another I mean that's a perfect. And this is the perfect year for stuff like that to happen because it's a deep draft class and everybody sort of can, you can kind of find the one you want, and it's because it's such a good draft class and because it's such a deep draft class, it's hard to just kind of it makes it more difficult to pinpoint. This guy's going to be available in the 20s. This guy's going to be available in the first 15 picks of the second round or something like that. It's just sort of that makes it tough, and teams are going to fall in love with their guys versus other guys, that they've done the homework. The Brian Quick example, perfect example of that.
It is.
Some team will find one receiver that they like better for whatever reason than maybe a guy that would be a better prospect, a better receiver, a better lineman, or whatever. So another name I don't think he probably is going to get into the first round, but now that we're taking centers in the first round, Martin out of USC. I mean, he's a fantastic center. And
I think that's...
and personally, if I'm looking at the Rams in the second round, that's somebody I would consider at 44 because the Rams don't have a great situation at center right now. I know there's kind of Barrett Jones, the fourth round pick from last year, but there's sort of this he didn't crack the line. He wasn't healthy last year. He didn't crack the lineup. I mean, it's this.
Right.
Is he sort of yet another Nick Saban has worn all the tread off the tires prospect and sent him to the NFL, as he is wont to do?
Sure. And has done it to
it's an interesting situation. I mean, you look at center's a valuable position now. Look at the Alex Mack thing. I mean, if you think it's your guy, then maybe you just go, hey, let's trade up to 32, 31 and get him.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, and that's where it's interesting, whether it's, you mentioned some of the different prospects, whether it's Marcus Martin or what Weston Richburg I've seen is one of those guys that, almost nobody's seen any real tape on, but, starts to gain this hype out of this position, and maybe that's somebody that a team cracks that position dam on and opens things up for the position going into the second round.
Absolutely.
One of the things I wanted to do before we get into some of the deeper draft talk for rounds 2 and 3 since we're kind of wrapping up that first round right there is go back and take some of the questions we had from the thread.
Let's do it.
Which I'm trying to...
I love thread questions, man.
Thread. While it's loading, Van, well, let's do this. Let's tell people, so what there's kind of 3 ways I want to attack this. If you weren't, working for SB Nation, if you weren't here in D.C., if you were a regular NFL fan, how would you want to enjoy the NFL draft? That's number 1. Number 2, if you were at home covering the draft, if instead of being here in D.C., how would you be covering it? And then 3, maybe give people a peek behind the curtain of what we got going on tomorrow night.
Well, I mean, if I were just, I don't know. We've been doing this for so long with the draft to TST. It's hard to think about what it was like before. It was it was a sort of an all-consuming interest and then a full-time job. So I don't know. I mean, I would probably just hang out and watch it. I mean, I probably wouldn't watch a minute of it on Saturday, to be quite honest with you. That's just it's to me it's fucking tedious. But the 4th through 7th, I'm happy for those guys. It's exciting to read about them, but I mean, I don't, it's not to me necessarily worth just sitting there and watching the ESPN crawler go by or NFL Network, whatever you prefer. And
you got to take it like the Kama Sutra, like the tantric sex, man. It's slow and drawn out, but if you just let it languish in your system, it can be orgasmic.
That's right. Yeah, and I'd say what's interesting about the work is how much work to produce from our side of things from TST, and then especially at SBNation.com because it covers the whole league. But we're just the amount of work in the draft is nothing compared to like Super Bowl. I mean, Super Bowl's huge, and Super Bowl is 2 weeks of just grunt and grind work, man. And the draft is even more of that. And there's less prep you can do for the draft because, at least the Super Bowl, you know what teams are going to be in there, you know what players are going to be in there, you know all the, you don't know the outcome of the game, but you know the players, you know the stories, you know everything but the game itself. Well, the draft, there's just you have no idea. And there's this massive demand for information. And it'll probably, it's the busiest day it's the biggest day for TST traffic wise. It's the biggest day for us on the NFL side traffic wise. Even outside of the Super Bowl, but this is a 3 days worth of stuff, and whereas the Super Bowl you kind of have a window of 36 hours or something
Right.
like because you've got Super Bowl Sunday and then the stuff the day after, and then it kind of fades out at 5 o'clock on Monday. I mean, there's still content out. We still produce stuff for because you do have the diehard fans and stuff, but it's just sort of the draft is all consuming. I mean, I can't.
It's huge. It's
Yeah,
huge, and that was kind of what I was mentioning early is the fact that it's gotten to be such a big event.
It is. It is. I mean, I spent an hour this morning going over the schedule so we could bring it just to talk about the work behind the scenes of it. It's proofreading stuff, coordinating the stuff that we've pre-written so to get it polished up and edited and stuff like that, and then finalizing a schedule. We have writer shifts we need to have filled and stuff like that. It's just it's crazy, and that's that Saturday thing is the most labor-intensive part of it because it goes so fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you don't know. It's like with you know who Johnny Manziel is. You know who Jake Matthews is. You know who Greg Robinson is. On the fourth round, you don't know who half these guys are unless you probably work a college football beat.
Yeah. No, I mean, as much college football as I watch, and this is one of the great things, is when I first joined TST, I was doing mock drafts and I wrote for Mock in the Draft. There weren't a ton of people who watched college football like all year and then watch NFL. A lot of college football fans were just college guys, and they followed the draft because it's important for recruiting. It's important to improve the program so that if you're in Alabama, you can say, look, we get these guys drafted. We get a James Carpenter in the first round. We get our guys drafted, so that if you get here, we're going to make sure that if you've got NFL potential, we maximize it.
Yeah.
From the NFL side, it was almost, some people might pick up on a Johnny Football throughout the season because the narrative was so big. They might check on Jadeveon Clowney or Teddy Bridgewater because he had some preseason hype. But no NFL fans, let's be honest, were watching Cody Latimer throughout the year. Nobody was going after Jimmy Garoppolo trying to find his tape throughout the year. It wasn't until after the season. So it's been great over the last couple of years to see now you've got great content throughout the year that crosses that bridge. That's really just football. It starts almost in high school with the recruiting process and follows that all the way through, and it kind of mimics that whole story stream development, the tech development for SB Nation. But you've got the capability to look at some of these guys. So take an Isaiah Crowell, running back who had gone to Georgia, high prospect coming out of high school, was playing real well, ends up having to leave the program, and now he's one of those guys that's coming out of the minor schools. Kind of, we've seen tons of prospects like that.
Yeah.
But now we're following it, whereas before, you'd come up on the draft and people would be saying, well, who is this guy? We have no idea. Now, I think in 2014, there's so much more content that's filling the backstory. Now, yeah, it means work. It means work that, you're going to have guys that fill that in and push it to page. But there's something to push the page, right? I think now you're not just leaning on a page out of Mel Kiper's draft book or whatever kind of analysis that Mayock spits out after that pick. That, as long as you're following the right maybe follows on Twitter or keeping up with whatever SB Nation's got coming out, that, somebody like Khalil Mack that comes out of Buffalo, there's going to be tons of content before, during, and after the whole process.
Should we? There's a few more questions in the thread. Should we grab?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's get to those questions because we were starting.
I
want to get behind the scenes. I want to get behind the scenes a little bit because I know we're going to have all these tons of content and trying to wrap in the college guys from the prospects. I'll go back and watch the tape on every prospect that we pull in, and then we'll get into the summer with the slower days and having to go back and review the 2013 game tape. But I think it's going to be fun having the TST brass at headquarters. It's going to be interesting. And I think there's going to be something like Mount Fireball. I don't even know what that means.
I don't ever say that word again.
You're the manager, so I'll let you take first crack. Questions. First one. I guess this is a good one with the Richard Sherman news that came out today. For people who didn't see, Richard Sherman got extended by Seattle. This one comes from Holt Fan. Interesting to discuss the amount of money tied up in Seattle secondary and Russell Wilson going to need an extension. Does that affect how the Seahawks draft, and what does this do for the Rams as an advantage, disadvantage down the road? Obviously, maybe this isn't a big issue for the 2014 draft, but moving forward it likely will be. What do you think? And maybe talk about how contracts affect different teams' draft strategy. What do you think?
Well, I mean, there's sort of when we haven't. I mean, I know the initial numbers are out on the Sherman contract, and it's the $40 million guaranteed is pretty stunning. I mean, but he's been. I mean, is there a better cornerback in the NFL right now? I don't think you could. I don't think you could make the case that there is a better cornerback than Richard Sherman. And you look at the plays he makes, you look at what he does, but they've signed. You've seen him sign. Part of the reason they get away with this is because Russell Wilson can't get an extension for. Wait a second, that sounded bad. They can't offer Russell Wilson a contract extension until after he's played in the league for 3 seasons. We hadn't played in the league. This will be his 3rd season this year. Right. So, that keeps it down a little bit, and we haven't seen what the cap effect of the Sherman deal is. So that'll be kind of interesting to see because, obviously there's some, there's some fuzzy math going on here because they've shuffled it around and they've done it this way. But to Seattle's credit, one thing they've done a good job of is they put themselves in this position because look at Seattle's secondary and outside of Earl Thomas, none of those guys are first-round picks. I mean, they're just they're guys that the rest of the league overlook. I mean,
right.
It's sort of amazing like that, and that's one thing that and that's where Seattle has done a good job. They have that kind of never-ending supply of depth that they can bring up. That they lost Brandon Browner and they got better with Maxwell in there. I mean, that's crazy to think about, I mean, you just you can't. It's sort of like what Green Bay made itself famous for. So they get away with it with that. We'll see. Obviously they're not going to have the same kind of cap flexibility that they had in the past. Now, we've seen the cap go up. We saw it go up 10% this year, and I think it's probably reasonable to expect it to go up a pretty good jump next year too. And you combine that with the the new thresholds in the CBA that a team has to spend at least there's an 89% cash floor or whatever it is. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but it's so you can make those extensions. It's just you're doing it in the right places as opposed to maybe this is a cornerstone of your franchise. Cornerbacks are always the shutdown corner is always a big deal, and they can kind of work around. They've shown an ability to work around him with less expensive guys, and I think that's where you look at the Rams are in such a different position with the Sam. I hate to bring this up, but the Sam Bradford contract. They didn't have a choice. I mean, they had a choice because they chose to draft him in 2010. Obviously, it was a different leadership, but they were stuck with that contract, and now you have this massive contract on the books that are you getting the return on it? I mean, that's probably something to argue another. That's probably not either here nor there, but it's it's different like that. And you look at some other teams, and the Cowboys are perfect example of how not to do the cap. I mean, I don't know that the Rams are in such terrible cap position. I just think they just have some contracts that are maybe out of whack from a value standpoint. The Bradford one's obvious. I think you could probably make the case James Laurinaitis isn't worth what they pay him. I mean, I know that's not a popular. I mean, he's a great guy. He's one of our favorite players, obviously. But is he really on the same? I mean, you're going to put this guy on the same level as Patrick Willis, or you're not going to do that, obviously. So that one, the Chris Long deal, Robert Quinn deal's coming up. You're going to have to do something with Robert Quinn after 2015. So it's you've got some bad contracts on the books from free agency. The Jake Long one they can probably get out of after this season. I think they probably will. I think that's probably why. To go back to the Matthews thinking a little bit, I think that's probably why they would maybe go with Matthews over Robinson, because there's more of a pass blocking left tackle that's more ready to play than the rest of the guys in the draft this year, and pass protection, and Long's ready to be ready for week one. But, I'm sort of going off on many tangents. That was sort of a long-winded, mini-tangential answer to that question, I guess.
Isn't that what we do? We made Turf Show Radio into an hour-long set of tangents.
That's right. That's right.
Never lose that skill. I think the key for that advantage-disadvantage isn't so much about the Rams. It's just about drafting late. And you mentioned that early. if you draft guys that end up becoming capable, and sometimes, I mean, take Cam Chancellor for the Seahawks. He was a fifth-round pick. He went to the Pro Bowl. Some people say he's almost as good as Earl Thomas, who is almost a consensus best safety in the league. When you draft guys in the fifth round that are that capable in such key positions, it almost doesn't matter what you do in some other places because you're able to pull in cheap talent at the top of the pool every single year. I think that's the key,
Absolutely.
and that's what the Rams have suffered to do. That's what they've been unable to do is really pull in.
And I think that's the bigger problem with the Rams cap and roster situation than the Jared Cook deal even.
Right.
Or Sam Bradford's contract, because you look at what Seattle's done over the last 3 or 4 years with draft picks, and they're getting starters out on the second and third day of the draft. The Rams have not done that.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably this is the third draft for Fisher and Snead, and it's fair to sort of question their track record in it. I mean,
sure.
You've got that 2012 draft is not a very. I mean, Jenkins and John. The steal of the draft may be Trumaine Johnson. Now he's got a full season as a starter coming up. Can he, live up to that? But that's a good deal if the Rams can get turn a third round pick into a starter. Chris Givens kind of tailed off. Rock Watkins is gone. I mean, Zerline's a kicker, so you have sort of a specialist there. It's nice to have that because you don't have to pay a free agent kicker to come in and do that. But, Richardson, Aaron Brown, does anybody remember Aaron Brown, the linebacker from Hawaii? I mean, it's, Richardson, Aaron Brown, Rock Watkins, Chris Givens, Isaiah Peed, Brian Quick, everyone's favorite pick, and then there's just not, and the same with last year. You should be pulling offensive linemen that become starters out of the late rounds of the draft, and we're not seeing that either.
At least once every couple of years. That's the difficult part, is that the Rams are so rarely capable of pulling somebody. You should be able to pull it every so often, right? Maybe one starter a year. Hopefully, if you want to be a good team, the Rams struggle to pull really anybody out of those late rounds.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's what's a problem.
It is. We do, however, have a decent track record of drafting well early, and I think it was a good question from Holt fan. Do we have any real information? And again, this goes back to how much of this do you believe and how much of it is straight BS, of what the preference is for the Rams at number 2 versus taking somebody versus moving.
Yeah,
I don't. We don't do a lot of source cultivation, obviously, but what do you think?
I don't. I really don't know. I really have the sense from just the sliver of information I was told this week about the Manziel stuff. And then based on, what else you're seeing in the media, I think there's enough out there that you can sort of piece together that maybe their draft board's set, but maybe their mind's not totally made up. And I think that's a fairly reasonable thing to say. I know they came out at that joke of a press conference they had yesterday and said, our big board's all set. We're ready. We're ready to go. Well, yeah, they're ready to go, and their big board may very well be set because they haven't had a chance to evaluate the players. But, the big board and what you do on draft day, there is a gulf there in terms of what I mean, they might have. I'm sure they probably have Clowney at the top of their draft board, but they might not be able to draft him if he goes number 1, or maybe they have, maybe this is where they draft Manziel if they didn't have to do it at number 2 thing comes into play.
Right.
But I think there's kind of an internal debate going on within the organization about this. Do we go forward with this? You think about it, they've had 2 seasons to see Sam Bradford now, and they've had 2 seasons to see what the rest of the NFC West has done in that time. And it's not. I mean, I know it's all cyclical, but 2014 is not the year, and 2015 probably isn't going to be either. Aren't the years when the Seattle Seahawks and San Francisco 49ers start to get worse? You know what I mean?
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to see that.
I mean, Arizona won 10 games last year.
That's exactly right.
In their secondary, they arguably have a better. They might have a better defense coming into this season than they did last year.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It is, as much as we look at the Rams and say, yeah, we're going to get better, everybody thinks their team gets better in the offseason. The difference is if you're the Rams, you've got a division with 3 other teams that all won 10 games that get a chance to get better too. That doesn't make it very
And
easy.
and here's another thing, and this isn't just about Manziel. I mean, you could say this about a lot of their picks, and I think
Sure.
Maybe the jury is still out on or players, period, not just draft picks. Free agents and the players that they've inherited and stuff as well. But I forget who said it recently. It was in one of the Manziel pieces, but if you think about it, it's who on the Rams outside of the defensive line is really a standout player.
Sure.
Now, I mean, maybe Tavon Austin will be because he struggled in his rookie season and he's just not quite there yet. And obviously that was a splashy draft pick. They traded up to number 8 to get him, that sort of thing. But maybe it's you think about it, it's not necessarily that players are bad all across the roster. And it's not that they have just a ton of holes on the roster, but who's really outside of Robert Quinn and Chris Long? Who would you say? I mean, who on this team is a standout player? I mean, who on this team is a nationally known, relevant player? I mean, maybe Zach Stacy. He could be, but we haven't seen a lot of them yet. Tavon Austin, same thing. Maybe Stedman Bailey. Some of those guys that have the 2013 rookies. It's probably a little early to put that in that, but they obviously didn't do it as rookies, and that doesn't mean they will, but they haven't done it yet as rookies, so you could say that about it. It's just like who on this roster besides Long and Quinn is a standout player, a difference-making superstar player, whether he's a first-round pick, a seventh-round pick, a free agent, or whatever. I mean, and the weird, I'll tell you, the weirdest thing to me after that, you see this more pointedly in the Manziel Bradford debate than you do, and then you have anywhere else. But there's this, in the 8 years since we've been doing Turf Show Time since 2006, and I don't know about other teams' blogs. I don't follow other team blogs as obviously as closely as Turf Show Times, but it's there's this. It's almost like a Stockholm syndrome with players. It's like we have this tendency as a community of fans. You kind of fall in love with these guys, and you think they're awesome. They're totally awesome. Like on draft day, it's like how people are excited. You get excited over Brandon McGee, man. Sweet, but it's just like you can't. The overvaluation aspect comes into it. I mean, you overvalue players as a fan, and I think maybe more so because the Rams haven't been very good for so long that maybe we as a fan base do that. Generalized, we as a fan base do that because we're just you're holding out for hope, and maybe that's it's really amazing. Like the outcry when they cut Jabara Williams, which is like maybe he could be a starter someday, but it's like let's not overvalue these guys just because they wear a Rams uniform. I mean, then I think that's probably one of the more maybe that's just because we're a long-suffering fan base. I don't know, but it's just like you can't, look on this team and tell me where outside of Robert Quinn and Chris Long they couldn't they couldn't have a better player at that position.
Yep. As young as a team as they are, if there's going to be one, they haven't turned into it yet. And I think you call it Stockholm syndrome. I'm gonna call it Daryl Richardson syndrome.
Exactly.
That, I think, was the one that proved to me that, fans know no bounds. You mentioned Zach Stacy. It was a good comment question in there from, let me see if I can find it. It was from a fan asking, who is going to be leading it's from D. Hawkins. Who is going to lead the Rams in touchdowns, and are they currently on the roster? You got to assume it's Stacy because the running back generally is going to lead the team in touchdowns outside of the quarterback. I think, and I mentioned this the other day, and I'd rather wait until we get into the offseason to go back and revisit this when it's more timely, is that Zach Stacy had some struggles down the stretch, especially in the NFC West, and there's a fair question to be asked if part of what contributed to his early success was a lack of expectation or lack of preparation from other teams, and that when you got towards the end of the season and your Arizona and Seattle's were able to game plan for that and had obviously the talent to deal with it, that's when you get some games like Zach Stacy had against Arizona, 14 carries for 25 yards. That's less than 2 yards a carry. The season-ending performance, 15 carries for 15 yards. That's 1 yard per carry.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say that Zach Stacy isn't a capable back. He certainly showed as a rookie some great skills, and I'm looking forward to it in 2014. But this idea that we should just be leaning into Zach Stacy and that, this whole run-first philosophy is going to work because it took some pressure off of Kellen Clemens. Let's not forget the Rams lost a decent number of games, and were it not for, some pretty productive defensive stretches, they could have been in a really, really bad place record-wise. I don't know that you're going to get all those opportunities defensively. They might. I mean, this is still shaped up to be a really solid defense, but, you talk about the way they've been managed, the fact that the cushion of death has made it so frustrating. Now you're throwing Greg Williams in there. That'd be great to get a more aggressive defense, but that also allows for some riskier opportunities for the opposing offense, and we'll just have to see. But I thought that was interesting to bring up Stacy and, the touchdowns. Do you think maybe a rookie could surpass Stacy in touchdowns?
Well,
do you think there's a prospect?
What my guess would be, because this sort of fits if you assume that they're gonna run the ball 25, like they did last season with Kellen Clemens at quarterback. If you assume that, then my other pick for that would probably, I think my pick would be, this would be where Brian Quick should be leading the team in touchdowns, because that's the guy, that's where a team like that that's where they have, you have the red zone fade route, the end zone fade route. That's where you go in and you call, that's where you have a guy like that can make that can catch touchdown passes in the end zone. He doesn't necessarily have to be a 1,000-yard guy, but Rams don't have a guy to do that.
Yeah, and I said earlier in the summer,
it's not quite. Lance Kendricks isn't consistent enough to do it, and Austin Pettis hasn't done. It's just they don't have a guy like that.
And I said, we did that roundtable earlier in the summer. I said that's the position that would improve the team the most. That's what they've got to do the most, is go get that big-bodied. And if it's Brian Quick, it works out. If it's Kenny Britt, it works out. But if it doesn't, I think that's going to be a huge hole for this offense to try to overcome, because, as you mentioned, you do all this great work to get down into the red zone. What are you going to do to get 7 points instead of 3? I think that's
and that to me brings up. that's a good segue into Mike Evans, because if there's a guy, if there's a receiver in this draft that really kind of fits what as great as Sammy Watkins is, don't get me wrong. He's the best receiver in this draft. I don't think there's really a question about that. But Mike Evans is really kind of what the Rams probably need more in a receiver than anybody else. He's just sort of that. That's what Brian Quick was supposed to be. That's what they've been missing. That's what they tried to do when Devaney and Spags were here, and they tried to go out and get Vincent Jackson. This is sort of, that would be a guy that really is a sorely lacking element in this offense. Yeah. And I think the receiver group is a much better group than it's been in years past, but it's still kind of missing that one component.
And, you speak about the one component. We got a great question to start wrapping this up. And it's actually two different questions. One was from OC Rams fan. He said, what 2 players do you think would improve the team this year? And Eric Nagel asked us, which one player, if you could draft them, who would it be? So maybe, what do you think? 2, 1 player, however you want to talk about it. Immediate impact, long-term impact. If you were drafting, who would you take? Now, Nagel added the caveat that you're not allowed to say Johnny Manziel. But if you were allowed to say Johnny Manziel, who would be maybe the 2 guys that you think, whether it's number 2, number 13, let's just say hypothetical, you could pick any 2 players from this pool. Who would you take?
I would say, and I'm a little torn on the safeties because I haven't really watched a lot of them play, but I would say maybe, to me, Clinton Dix or Calvin Pryor would be an ideal pick for the Rams. There's a reason you see those guys over and over and over and over and over again to the Rams in mock draft, because it's, that's a good defense, except at safety. They don't have a good cover safety that can work deep, and you're going to need that if you're going to do stunts and blitzes and things like that, like Greg Williams likes to do. You're going to have a good, reliable cover safety. I kind of wonder if they'll draft one of those guys, because you kind of think with this coaching staff, maybe they'll find those guys later. They think they can get a cover safety in the later rounds of the draft and coach them up a little bit. But either way, I think if you're talking about just in terms of the sheer impact for 2014, I don't think, whichever of those safeties is viewed as a better deep cover guy, there's nobody would have the kind of impact on the team that one of those guys would. I mean, I think that's huge, tremendous impact. And then on the flip side, I'd say, you go over the offensive side, I would probably say, no, I don't know, because if you take the quarterback out of the question, I mean, I would say Mike Evans, but I just don't think the Rams Sam Bradford's not a good quarterback. I'm sorry. This is just, I hate to troll like that, and I'm not really trying to. I don't have faith that another receiver, another blue chip receiver is going to demonstrably make this a better offense. I don't think receiver is the problem.
It took me 1 hour, but I knew I'd get it out of you. I knew I would.
Well, it's the truth, man. We're truth. It's like Deion Sanders always tweets that weird shit with the truth hashtag. I love athlete Twitter. It's just the best. Rising ground.
You are hashtag blessed. I think
humble.
And OC Rams fan also has BPA need. It's a blend of both. You can't go full BPA, otherwise you end up drafting the same quarterback every year. You can't just go need, because then you miss out on the quality talent. You got to blend the two.
About value too. It's like we talked about earlier with the 5th-year option on guys on players you take in the first round. That inflates. A guard may be the best position available, the best player available at pick 22, but there's also a quarterback on the board, and your franchise needs a quarterback, or maybe it's a pass rusher, or whatever. It's just sort of
and the opposite too, right? You were talking about Russell Wilson. Seattle's not going to go out and spend a first-round pick on a quarterback. San Francisco isn't going to go get a linebacker when they got Patrick Willis and Navarro Bowman.
Yeah.
At the exclusion of improving their team somewhere else. You got to balance those things. It's not 100% BPA, 0% need. It's in that gray area.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that's probably one of the more, like, if you want to talk about draft myths and things like that, that's probably, the media is really bad, especially on TV, about throwing around, and the radio. They throw around that BPA talk too much, and it's not really, it's not vetted well. It's not well thought out, because there's no such thing as
pure BPA.
It's not.
That's not true. Al Davis early on. I mean, you draft a punter in the first round. That was a man who had the balls to say, "This is who I think is the best player available, and I'm going to take him." Screw rational thought. I'm going to take the guy. I'm going to take a kicker.
I miss Al Davis.
You have to, man.
I miss when we had villains like that in the NFL, like actual villains like Jimmy Haslam, and
He refused. Yeah, exactly. The great thing about Al Davis was he refused to play by the rules of logic, and that made it fun. Because in the end, no matter what else happens, you can always say, well, they were trying to be logical. Jeff Fisher, Les Snead, Billy Devaney, Spagnuolo, Zygmunt, whoever, they were trying to be logical.
Tony Softly.
Al Davis, Tony Softly, yeah. Softly was trying. He was trying. Not the focus was on the trying, not the logic. The thing with Al Davis, though, it wasn't logic. It was emotion, and it was manhood, that he wanted to outdraft his peers instead of actually make picks that would benefit his team the best. Al Davis was special, man, in a way that I wish we had somebody else. And not Jimmy Haslam, corporate America style. We've got enough.
Jerry Jones is sort of approaching that. I mean, in a little.
Isn't that scary though? Jerry Jones, the person who unseated the corporate threshold of the NFL and broke all these barriers for the ridiculousness of so much of what goes on into the NFL model now, that he's becoming the one that we look to for that good old nostalgic footballiness. That scares me, man. That scares me more than anything. I guess the last question.
Well, I will say this. In some ways, though, it would be kind of, maybe it would be nice to have an owner with some personality. That's fired.
That is the thing. The last question I think was a good one. It's from Smith, and this is something obviously pertinent to this year. The draft got pushed back 2 weeks. Goodell, as recently as yesterday, said it was because Radio City Music Hall had a scheduled event, which we all know is bullshit, because why would Radio City Music Hall schedule something when they have the draft? Radio City Music Hall knows the draft is coming every year. The NFL wanted to move it back. Now there's some rumors that they might move it back again.
Yep.
And Smith mentioned that the Colts GM had mentioned that the draft board was set. They didn't want to overanalyze it because of the extra time. Has the extra time affected anything? I would suggest it hasn't affected anything that normally doesn't get affected. I would suggest if there's overanalyzing of set big boards, it happens regardless of the draft being 2 weeks from now or 2 weeks prior.
Yeah. I mean, the overanalysis doesn't come from extra time. It comes from, nonstop 24.
Uncertainty. Yeah.
I mean, that's just, every year we've seen this. I mean, it's every year it's bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think if the draft is April 1st, then it's really not going to change that aspect of it. You're still going to get the hot takes. You're still going to get incessant coverage of every bloody little thing about it. I mean, you'd have to put it like the day after the combine to sort of eliminate that from a time standpoint.
Right.
So it's not the extra time. I'll tell you where the extra time might start to factor in is, that was the time that teams had for rookie minicamp.
Right,
All
exactly.
that gets pushed back, and they're already limited in terms of how many contact days they can have with players, coaching
Sure.
staff and players. And it's pretty severely limited. I mean, in the new CBA, it's cut down even more than it was in the last. And that's something you hear Fisher talk about all the time.
Right.
And understandably so, because they don't. And I think that's why Chip Kelly is a successful coach, or will be a successful coach over the long run in the NFL, because the college model has, he's kind of learned to work within that and maximizes those practices like that and learns how to, you get the most out of that short window. But I think if you push the draft back too much more, you risk cutting into the prep time that teams and players have, and I think that's, then you start to put the NFL's golden goose at risk, which is parity. I mean, and you start to, you can't injured players, rookies that aren't developing fast enough. I mean, it's just, the churn and burn rate for play. You risk up in the churn and burn rate for players. You risk teams being worse. And this, I mean, my God, you can't. There's no way. I mean, it's just that'll be an interesting thing to watch about. And they said too, they could split it up and add another day to the draft, which is just sort of like.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah, I'd be okay with that. The only thing I don't understand is, I guess I understand that the draft occupies so much space in the sports media world that from January until whenever it happens, there's always a headline you can pull out of it. And the further you push that back, the greater the capability of the NFL to stay on the front page of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch sports page, right? Maybe not St. Louis, but
has NFL ever into the St. Louis?
Let me take that back. Maybe not the PD, but most NFL home cities newspapers, right? The NFL can remain relevant even in the off season.
And that's that's the strategy. I mean, that's the thinking behind it.
But what I'd be interested to see is if that strategy actually bears out. Like, has extending the draft really brought them more dollars? I mean, has it improved the bottom line? I'm almost kind of skeptical because it's almost like, I don't know. And maybe it's the naivete of thinking, well, how much can people really give a shit about, Garoppolo 2 months ago, Tom Savage a month ago, the drop of Teddy Bridgewater 2 weeks ago, and the resurgence of Johnny Manziel this week. It would seem like that's not really pulling in people that otherwise wouldn't be paying attention to this stuff, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, and I think that's probably why, that's why there's you could see why you could see the extra day added onto it is to drum up more interest in TV ratings around those, those rounds 4 through 7 where you don't necessarily, the players aren't really well known to you.
Right.
So you've got to come up with another way to, push the ratings up on that. It's like the Pro Bowl. I mean, they get good ratings, but it could always be better. So I think
that extra day makes sense. It was just that having pushed it back 2 weeks this year, and the suggestion of pushing it back again just makes no sense to me, man. I'm ready for the draft.
Yeah.
We've been up. Here's the analogy. We've been up for 30 hours. It's time to just do what we do before we go to bed and get some sleep. What were we talking about earlier? Tantric. It's been a tantric experience, and I'm exhausted, man. I'm exhausted. My fluids are low. My body's not making sense anymore. I just need you to draft and get off of me. Get off me.
Yeah, exactly. At this point, I can't. I mean, it's the law of diminishing returns is in full effect.
Well, I guess we'll see everybody tomorrow night. We're going to have recaps of every single pick. open threads throughout the night, reaction across the internet, draft grades, staff reaction, linking up, as I mentioned, with the college blogs. So, when the Rams take, whether it's Greg Robinson out of Auburn, Sammy Watkins out of Clemson, Jake Matthews, A&M, we'll go to that community for the college team and link up with those guys for some reaction, some discussion. And we're going to try to put as much as we can. What did you say? Spitting fire? Did I make that up? What did you say? Throwing gas on the fire for content? Whatever your cliche was, that's what we're going to be doing.
I got a lot of cliches, 3K. You know that.
They're worthwhile. They're the best. But we'll be in person, SB Nation headquarters tomorrow night, cranking it out.
That's right.
I gotta figure out how to watch the draft with you guys. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love you guys and all, but I need to watch the draft, man. I don't want y'all getting in the way of my draft. Don't get in the way of my climax. Don't get in the way of my climax to continue that.
The television will have it, and so we've got it. We'll be on the TV watching it. We've got a tracker app that will release tomorrow too. That's really a pretty sweet little deal that we're doing this year. So I think that'll be awesome. And the studio's doing a live show, so we've got Dan Rubenstein and Matt Ufford with some special guests, including NFL people from the team blogs. A lot of fun stuff on that show before and after the first round tomorrow. We'll have a link to it on TST for sure, so we'll get it all. We're going to have you covered up with draft, hot takes, and then some.
You're going to be dripping in draft content.
That's right. Unique football content, 3K.
Yes.
Unique football content.
So we mentioned Softly. We mentioned Sam Bradford isn't a good quarterback. Stace God. I guess we didn't really fully reference Stace God. We need to have a list of things that we have to mention every time we do one of these.
Well, the one we did mention, it's not this. If we're talking about the draft, it's not so much the forum for it. But I guess you could probably. There's a way, but stadium, Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. Those are the big ones that you gotta, if you're covering the Rams, you gotta throw out there. I can't think of any.
That's a perfect one, though. I think the stadium would round that out between stadium, Sam Bradford, not good, Tony Softly, Los Angeles. I think that's a good.
Hey, wouldn't it be a lot easier for Stan Kroenke to get the taxpayers of Missouri to pony up if they had an exciting quarterback like Johnny Manziel in the fold?
Let the conspiracy deepen. I love it. Rinse, wash, repeat. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Stay tuned. It's going to be a fun weekend / whatever the draft is. It's got its own little corner of the calendar carved out for good reason. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And then next weekend, hibernation, total hibernation. So it's going to be pretty sweet, let me tell you.
And well-deserved for you guys coming from the mothership. But until then, man, we'll see you guys tomorrow night.
Take care, everybody.